If on the path of truth you did not end up a vegan anarchist, you did not go all the way. So today I'm going to talk about how the ideologies of vegetarianism and libertarianism did not go all the way, and they could be considered tent-pitching ideologies. Tent-pitching, a term used by Mark Passio, as in going up the mountain of enlightenment and stopping short of it and pitching a tent, which of course we're all liable to do at some point. And so we're going to talk about why that is the case with these ideologies. And first we must make the distinction between the qualitative and quantitative aspects of good and evil. And some people think that the less evil means that it's good. And we have to understand qualitatively, good and evil don't change into each other because of the law of identity. Evil is evil, good is good, and the law of excluded middle, there is no in-between. Now the in-between has to do with the relative spectrum of evil, and then separately the relative spectrum of good. And so you can have more and less of either. And with evil we can say that sexual assault is better than rape, but even that doesn't quite sound right. It sounds better to say that rape is worse than sexual assault. They're both evil. And so So what we see with these philosophies of vegetarianism and libertarianism is that they want to lessen the quantity of evil to oh so little, so little animal exploitation, oh so little human exploitation, limited government. And and that's a problem, and even some vegetarians, they want to go as so tiny, like maybe 0.01%, where they're just catching those eggs falling out of those chickens' vaginas. And we're going to talk about why that's a problem. And it's a problem because we have to always begin with principles. Principles are first principles. And when we're talking about the duality of good and evil, we're talking about a moral duality, a spiritual dimension there. And that regards our moral compass and the do no harm. And, of course we have to evolve out of our lower selfish nature, it's all about me, into the higher moral, aware and awake, selves, our real selves. That's where we're aware of what's going on, and where we unify our own consciousness within, and then we live in harmony with natural law without. So when we develop moral consciousness, we understand the principle of self-ownership, and that I own my own body and animal owns their own body. So I have no owners, I have no masters. Even though government wants to tell me they own me, that's not real. Authority is an illusion, so it's not real that I own another animal. Now, of course, we can take care of animals, and have them be like our family members, but that's completely different than owning them and using them. And when we talk about using, we're now speaking of the moral distinction in philosophy between ends and means. And every sentient life is an ends into itself, not a means to an ends. We shouldn't use each other to get something, just in the way that we shouldn't use animals to get something or exploit or objectify. And so, with vegetarianism, the question really becomes, why compromise that principle, even to a tiny degree? Because, when you compromise that principle, you're actually indulging in an action that's diluting the principle and, in bringing on a little bit of self-contradiction, which fragments the consciousness. And it's a holographic fractal universe. So even just a tiny area of your life where you do that, you start to kind of blur the lines between good and evil in other areas, and exceptions can start to pop up everywhere, and that's just, you're becoming divided. You're becoming divided within, because let's face it, none of us are going to be perfect, and there are going to be situations with food where we might have to compromise. As a vegan, I can say that, there are a few times I've compromised on honey, and not happy about that. But, sometimes it happens. So why would you seek to create that imperfection, when there are going to have to be real life, exceptions, and which doesn't make it good. Let's remember, it's, the qualitative distinction there. But So, this really becomes apparent that how a lower quantity, how it relates to a high quantity in libertarianism, where you have, limited government, and, you know, more than 100 years ago, you have our founding fathers, writing the Constitution, but they opened the door for horrendous evil, and now we're on the verge of global tyranny, and everything's chaos and a mess, and the whole financial system and all. And so, when we take a step back and look holistically, that seed of evil, of allowing just 1% tyranny and slavery and 1% owning of us, is now like going to be like 100%, So, you see how the only difference between, the seed and the tree is just time, the factor of time. And that's why, when we start to corrupt our principles, they ultimately lead to greater corruption. And not only that, it's that everyone influences everyone else. And so, if we're in these ideologies of vegetarian libertarianism, we have that influence on other people as well, to start making their own exceptions in their own ways, for government and animal torture and murder and whatnot. And government should be considered human torture. So let's, if we pitched a tent, let's get out of our tent and start to develop some self-love, because that's really what it all comes down to. I mean, to love ourselves, enough to want the best for everyone, and to care about every sentient being, and to know that when we do that, we will go up that spiral dynamic of evolution, and our lives will become lighter and freer and happier and more joyful and prosperous. So yeah, so I'm encouraging you all to do that. And thank you. Sorry, I have a cold. Thank you for listening to me, and I love you guys. Goodbye.